today. I had some fun doing some AI generation, making these slides. So I'm your Crypt Keeper host because I have been around since the inception of Salesforce in 2001. And I also have been there when custom objects and integrations were introduced. So I have seen the beginning and I have seen where we are right now with our crazy it's not terribly crazy, right? But this world that we're in where we were doing what we were doing, and now they're saying, oh, guess what? Data, AI, all the things, agents, agent force, right? So, what we're going to do today to make it super easy is we're going to stick with just the APIs that go in and out of CRMA. And we can have another meeting after this that would go into, we can broaden out, but I think for the purposes of just understanding how data gets in and out and the engineering behind CRMA, we should just stick to these topics. So the two APIs we're going to talk about today are the bulk API, which I think everyone's familiar. This is when you're doing the data loader, or this is when you're doing external files as an admin. That uses bulk API, and that has an interface inside your setup. And then we're going to look at the analytics REST API. So if you're brand new to APIs and you've never heard REST API or analytics REST API, let me just tell you something, make your life easier. The REST API is the heavy hauler. It's going to be your fast lane in the freeway. This is the lane everybody wants to use, whether it's analytics or otherwise. So in the future, when you're starting to work with all your different API choices, you're going to see REST API a lot. So just kind of as a side note for extracurricular, you may want to do some reading now because all of our futures will basically be dependent on it. It's also where data cloud's going to go in the future too. So if you're going in that realm, it's a good thing to know. Okay. So here's me. I'm the Crypt Keeper. There's my proof. There's Dreamforce 2004. So if anybody questions, that's my old last name, by the way, when I was married to my first husband. But if anybody ever doubted that I've been around for that long, there's my badge. So I thought that would be funny. And, you know, I have days, and so do everyone else on this call, where we feel like this while we're working with data, right? You don't necessarily have to be around 20 years to be in Crypt Keeper status. The data world is a little crazy right now for all of us. All right, so for those of you who don't know, and I didn't know when I started using CRMA, when it was Wave back in the day, it lives, it lives inside of your instance. It is not outside of Salesforce, it is inside. So here we have the lovely haunted house. We all have weeks like this, right? Where sometimes our orgs function like a haunted house. It's a little scary in there, right? CRMA has a room inside your instance, just like everything else does. So any data that's going in and out of Salesforce or in and out of CRMA is using the same door to get in, or doors, so to speak. And if you don't know this either, in CRMA, we have two UIs. So the data is going in and out of the haunted house, right? But we have two different ways that we can see this data once it's in. One of them is the data manager, where we can store, manipulate, enhance the data. And then we also have Analytics Studio, where we can query the data that we've enhanced and also make cool viz. So if you're a Tableau person, it's kind of the same thing, right? Except it's outside of Salesforce, where the data is going in, and then you have a UI to manipulate it, and then you have a UI to see it. So same concept, two different products. The difference is Tableau's like the outhouse on the back of this house, or the garage, right? And CRMA is actually inside of Salesforce. All right, so I was going to have some fun with this Halloween theme here. It's like, what is an API? And we talked about this before the meeting, but I think the picture says it all. We just gave it a little spooky flavor today. It's how your data gets in and out of your Salesforce instance. So we can imagine with these boats here that, one of them is a bulk API, REST API, Chatter API, SOAP API. Every single one of these boats going in and out has a data, what they call a payload, right? So, or they will have prompts, commands, different things to do depending on which API you're using. So, for example, if you're working with like Apex Soap, you could say, I'm going to send this boat into Salesforce. You're going to start a workflow. You're going to do 10 other things, and you're going to bring some data back to me, right? And then the boat would come back out with all of its boxes. For our use cases, it's not that complex. We're basically saying, I want to send data into CRMA. So we pack the boat with some boxes, and then we go into CRMA and we bring the boxes back out. I'm going to click on this link just so you can see quite a bit of APIs. So for everybody on this call, if you want to learn all of the different APIs, all the different roads on the freeway, or lanes on the freeway, or the different boats going back and forth from the haunted island with your instance, this is everything. Yeah, and I'm not kidding. This is where we're at. So just think of these as, you don't have to learn every single one. You just have to learn what applies to you. And you can read down here on particular ones individually. Most of the time, it's devs that get into that. We just have to know how it works, but the devs have to know how to code with them. So this was the screen I just showed you when we went to the page with all of these. We're only going to be talking about these two today. And here's what this looks like to me. This is scary in its own way. It's not Halloween, but have you ever been caught on traffic like this, right? It's kind of how I feel when I see this screen. If you're in an org and you're using every single one of these APIs, the data movement and the different command movements are going to look somewhat similar to this. If you're a visual person, it's super easy to see how the APIs work. If you are not a visual person, it's a little harder to understand how there can be lots and lots of layers and depth to Salesforce. So for people who are listening to this call, one of the best things that you can do is understand these metaphors when you're explaining APIs to your company, because most people don't see Salesforce as a living, breathing entity with lots of facets, right? And so if you can use either, boats coming in and out of a harbor, a freeway at 5 o'clock, it's a lot easier for people to understand all the many things you can do with it, as you can see on this page here. All right, so luckily we only used 2 for CRMA, and I did my research. I stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning the other night, and I wanted to make sure that nothing had changed since the last time I built anything in CRMA per this last release, because I will admit I've been a little bit behind since the release and haven't quite gone through all the notes yet. So I want you to imagine this is your Salesforce instance again, and the data has to get in and the data has to get out, right? So when we're using CRMA, there's 2 choices depending on what you're doing with it. And these choices, you don't have to make these decisions. They come out of the box. So Salesforce has taken care of it. You just have to click the buttons to do different things in the UI, and that's what will make the data go back and forth. Only developers, if you are working with a developer, can go in and make changes. So for example, I had a developer that I said, I want you to automate this data from the outside of Salesforce to come into CRMA and update a data set. And we had a data lake, right? And he wrote some code for me and sent it into CRMA. I wouldn't expect that I would do that or anybody else on this call would do that. But that's the type of things developers can do. But you don't need a developer. It works just fine without, having that. Okay, so I made this grid. Isn't this pumpkin the cutest down here? I didn't think skeletons and pumpkins could be so cute. Okay, so when you're talking about origination point, we want to know what's outside of Salesforce and what's inside of Salesforce. Sayantani, have you ever seen anything like this in our entire journey with CRMA where somebody said, like, what type of file are we trying to get in there? Where does this originate? And which API does it use?
Happens to happen today morning.
Okay, that makes me feel better about staying up to 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay.
Asking about this exact thing.
So if you're using external files, like I'm a user and I want to upload a G Sheet or a CSV, that's outside of Salesforce. It uses the bulk API, and you can put it into the data manager for storage. You put it into a recipe and manipulate it. And you can also use it in Analytics Studio. I don't know if anybody on this call has noticed, when you pull in, like, for example, a replicated object, it only sits in the data manager, but then it's not over in Analytics Studio for you to do anything. You have to run it through a recipe and then make a data set. So when I first started working with CRMA, that was very hard for me to grasp. I was like, if it's here, why isn't it there? Because nobody explained this to me. So replicated objects are exactly what they're called, replicated objects. So I'm in a recipe and I want to use accounts. I can replicate a subset of accounts or all of my accounts and then do fun things with it, join it with opportunities, or use it alone, or only take 2 fields. But when you're using the replicated objects, they're only in the data manager and for use in recipes. Whatever you make with them would then end up in Analytics Studio. External connectors are not something everybody's using, but the people who are using them a lot. So if you go into CRMA and you say, hey, I want to use one of the many external connectors, they take data from outside of Salesforce. They're using what we talked about before, the Analytics REST API, and you can actually make that data land in all 3 places, depending on how you configure it. So there's a lot of flexibility with that data. Live connectors. So I have a live external connector on my org that goes into Google BigQuery and grabs data every 15 minutes for a data set. The interesting thing is that data does not go to the data manager. It does not go into recipes. It goes straight to the data set and updates the data every 15 minutes. So when we first hooked that up, I was very confused because I thought, I'm going to take that live data and I'm going to make a recipe on it. Nope. So if you're using a live external connector, you cannot have that data go into a recipe and manipulate it. You also can't put security on it. And the reason being is that data is in movement. So imagine it is in transit on that freeway. It's in transit on the scary, spooky river. So you can't manipulate what is moving. And then we have a SOCWL connector. And this one was confusing for me too. I'm like, wow, how are we like live querying Salesforce when, from CRMA, like it's magic. I don't understand how this is happening, right? All the SOCWL connector is doing is it is going from, your dashboard and out to your Salesforce instance. Well, you're in your Salesforce instance, but let's say from CRMA to where your objects are stored in the meta layers, and it's pulling the data back for your dashboard. It's not actually stored anywhere. It's just grabbing the data and showing it to you. So it's not in the data manager for you to use. It's not in recipes for you to use, but it is in your dashboard. And then last but not least, we have Salesforce Direct. Kind of the same concept. It just goes from it goes and gets your data for you. Difference is it stores it. So Sayantani, I actually looked at all of these online the other night and said, does it do what I'm putting it in here? Is there any caveat that I'm not considering? And I read, and it's a lot more flexible than it was like 5 years ago. But like you have a lot of choices. My concern comes when this is the only one using the bulk API, your
Mhm.
external files. So all of these REST API calls would be sharing the limits with the rest of your org. So if you're hauling a lot of heavy data in your org and then you go into CRMA and you haul a lot of heavy data, you're gonna run into some problems. But
Yep.
that will be our next meeting that we will talk about that, right? We're not going to talk about problems today. We're going to talk about how things work.
So I'm going to add something to
Yes.
that, uh, real quick. We say that external connectors is outside of Salesforce, but it's also called external connector if you're using another Salesforce org, or you're using your current Salesforce org, but creating a different connection which is not called SFDC local.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so we can make this grid, like as we're playing with everything, we can make this grid different. But I was curious how that worked if you can do org to org. I didn't go that deep here, right? But if you
Mhm.
go org to org, or what was the second scenario?
So you have the same Salesforce org, but you're using some of the objects in Salesforce org as a second connection that also is basically an external connector to the same org, but it is called an external connector.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's an outlier situation, but you can actually use the external connectors and hook back to your org if you want to find a very creative way to get your data around.
Uh-huh. So one big reason of doing it is if you have sub-hour runs like we have in our org, you the every object in Salesforce that is connected to a recipe or a data flow is going to run every uh, every for us it's 20 minutes. You can do 1 hour or whatever. The minimum is I think 5 minutes currently, but we do every 20 minutes. But then there are things like, let's say you have over 50 objects in your Salesforce org. You may not want all the 50 to be running every 20 minutes. There may be only 10 you want to run every 50 minutes. There might be every 15 minutes. There might be another 10 which you want to run every hour, and there might be another 30 which you want to run maybe daily or just weekly, right? So how do you do that without clogging everything in Salesforce? Because as Jen just explained, everything is API and they're all using the same analytics REST API. And
Oh,
they go
so
to
one of the connections that you're talking about would use the bulk API, the ones that are replicating your data sets straight from Salesforce. But then if you use the connector, you can do
correct.
additional pulls over the REST API, and that way you're
Exactly.
not overloading one of them.
One of them, exactly. So if you don't want to overload things and still want things to run properly, you need to find a way. So the way around is use an extra, say it's an external connector. That external connector's name is Salesforce. Put in the username password with the security token, and you can go in and run it whenever you want.
Okay, so you're being tasked with like I'm gonna have to put another slide with that situation in here, but not today. So for those of you on the call, before I go to the diagrams, are APIs starting like are the light bulbs starting to go off about like these different lanes of data and how they get back and forth? Or is everyone multitasking? Because that's what I would be doing. Anyway, my point is you can stop us at any point in this call if you would like to ask questions. Like you just chime in with your questions because we have a very small group today. All right. And maybe
Uh,
that,
then Meryl said getting there definitely need to do more research, and
yeah,
need
it's
to give the thumbs up.
there's a lot of choices. And so the good thing about CRMA is it's already out of the box. It does this for you. You don't have to code unless you want to. But as far as like the rest of Salesforce, if you're using like Data Cloud or you have applications, that pass data back and forth, like Outreach or Gainsight or ServiceNow, um, you know, you're going to have to learn what API all of those use and how it works. And how they work is really simple. It's what they can't do that's the hard part that I keep saying. Like you can get data in and out of all the APIs, but trying to understand like which API is better and why is a little bit more difficult. But that will be our next call. All right. So this was very, very hard to draw because it lives in my brain. So bear with me. I just love this bat, by the way. It's so cute. Okay, so when we're a user with an external file, or we have maybe a developer has built an integration to a data lake, or we have different applications. And when I say applications, that means, okay, Sayantani, name a product that also works with CRMA. Like I'm going to say SnapLogic, like middleware, or Snowflake, right?
Yep, AWS, all the AWS stuff like Azure, AWS, Azure, MuleSoft, all of them.
Yeah. So if you have anything out in the wild outside of Salesforce, out of the box, what is going to happen is you're going to, let's use the one that the user with the external file. So I'm a user, I'm inside Analytics Studio. I say, okay, I want to upload my own CSV. So when I click that button and push it in, this is a data insert. That's actually what it's called on the API. It's a data insert. Now, technically, you could do like an upsert, but we're going to say insert for purposes of keeping it easy here. These go into your Salesforce org, and they land in an actual custom object called Insights External Data. And then if it's a multi-part file, it's going to be broken up into a child object called Insights External Data Part. This is not the easiest thing for people to understand. I had to go when I first started working with CRMA and ask the product team how this works under the hood. The cool part is that you can query this object inside your Salesforce instance, either in Workbench or in, like, for example, if you have Salesforce Inspector, you can actually query this object and see these data loads coming in. It's crazy. This is probably one of the very best things I ever did in my career was understand that data comes into a holding bin object for use for CRMA before it even gets to CRMA. Now, once it's in this object, two different things can happen. It can update or replace an existing data set in Analytics Studio, or you can send it to the data manager and use it for recipes, which then your final data set would land here to view. And once again, it's interesting, right? Because we think CRMA is all the same product. It is the same product, but it has two different engines, so to speak. It has a data manipulation engine, and then it has a visualization engine in it, just like Tableau would, right? So when you break this up into digestible pieces, it's a lot easier to understand how your data is moving on the back end. And more interesting is that this uses your bulk API. So bulk API is bulk API 1 and 2. And the reason it's 1 and 2 is because Salesforce created a secondary bulk API 2 in the last 5 years. So there used to only be one bulk API. Now we have two different bulk APIs that you can use. So imagine the fast lane got split into like the carpool lane and the fast lane, right? So we have two different lanes on the freeway. And the reason that they use the bulk API is because you can put the largest amount of data through it. It's slower because it's large, but you can put the largest amount of data. CRMA also shares the limits of bulk API with the rest of your org. So I found that out the hard way where I work, because we decided we were going to push in a bunch of data lake. One of the many lessons I've learned in my Salesforce career is we decided, we're just going to push everything we build in our data lake into CRMA. And guess what happened? The bulk API has hourly limits of how many jobs you can put through, and we completely blew through that limit. I mean, like nothing else in the org could use that bulk API because we had too many jobs backed up. So it's always good to do an impact assessment and understand, like, whenever you want to push large amounts of data into CRMA, you want to see how that affects the rest of your org, right? If you get an error that says that you've reached an hourly limit, then you have to wait an hour for it to reset. It's not terrible, but it's not optimal if you have something like quoting, you know, where there's like quotes need to be generated and now there's no bulk API bandwidth. All right, let's go to the next slide. So here's some resources on bulk API. This is that object that I was telling you about. Let me just click on this real quick for you. If you want to learn about this object and what fields it contains, you can't really do a lot with this page, except it gives you some example queries. It tells you which fields are in here. This is mostly for developers. And then we also have the parts. So if you have a file that's been broken up, like, for example, if we send in like every opportunity for the last year, we have to send them in month by month. Otherwise, it's too much data, right? So you would send one big job in with all the months. So the data part would be the individual months. You can see on here, same thing. It kind of just tells you some specs about it. Not a lot of fields, but just some additional data about how many parts of that you brought in. The other one that I put on here is an example query. So if you do have Workbench or you have Salesforce Inspector, this would be an example query of some of the fields. So for example, we had our data lake pushing in jobs all day. I could throw this query into Salesforce Inspector and I could see the jobs in there. It's really cool because you don't need a data lake. You don't need another tool. You can just pull the data straight out of the back end of Salesforce and look at it, because that's an actual object inside Salesforce that stores the information about your external files. If you want to monitor your bulk API jobs going in and out of CRMA, you can use the, we all know, like in the admin panel, right? We can look at bulk jobs. You can see all the bulk jobs going through your org. Problem is, you're not going to see the 2.0 jobs. You're only going to see the 1.0 jobs. If you're lucky enough to have event monitoring, I have event monitoring where I'm at. There's an event log browser that allows you to pull these files and look at them. So these are your options if you want to monitor. And then, of course, we do have the data manager, right? That's going to tell you all the specs about your data going back and forth. But if you want to see how that works with everything else that's using that same freeway lane in your entire instance, you would need to use one of these two methods to see that. All right, let's go to replicated objects, the easiest part of CRMA thus far, right? So we are only inside of Salesforce at this point. Oh, sorry. We're not, sorry, UPS at my door. Hey, knock it off, come on. Sorry, guys. Okay, real life happens. We are only inside of Salesforce at this point. We're not taking data from outside. So what we're doing is we're inside CRMA, and we're going to go get some of our data sets, or sorry, not data sets, custom objects or objects from our regular org. So think of it this way: the haunted house picture I showed. I'm in that bottom room with the light, and now I'm going to go walk into the kitchen, and I'm going to go get my data, and I'm going to go bring it in to the living room with me, right? So this is really metaphorically all we're doing here is that we're in the data manager, we're querying our objects over here, and we're bringing the data back. And once we have it in here, we can do different things with it, right? We can put it in a recipe, we can put it in a data set, we can leave it as is, even if we want, and use it in other places. But it's really a way of just going and getting what's already in your org data wise and bringing it back in to use in visualizations. This is the easiest part by far the easiest part of CRMA for getting data. But the interesting part is that it uses the analytics REST API. So it is sharing the REST API with everything else that's on your REST API. So for those of us that get mad because there's limits, and Sayantani, remind me, what is it? You can do like 60 replicated objects in a day or something like. I can't remember exactly what the limits are anymore, but the reason that there are those limits is because if you were just updating your data in CRMA every 5 minutes, nothing else would be able to get through the REST API on the rest of your org.
So on that point, Paul, who is a Tableau ambassador, he has created an awesome tool to help us figure out how much replication is done and what is going on. So his tool actually guides you through it, not just on replication, but how many recipes are running, when it is running, and all those kind of things. So it's a really neat and cool tool that is free of cost. I'm going to post the link here so anyone can go in, and I suggest you put it in your
Yeah, if
board.
you can add that to my presentation, maybe even we can add another
I'll
slide.
add it. Yeah, I'll do that.
After we get through this today and we digest what's happening here, I want you to think about what you can add to this presentation, Saitani, that you know that I don't know, because I think we're just going to be like a living document for the CRMA team. I know Mark is asking, we record this so he can use it to explain it to his customers. So if you could kindly add anything that would help anyone else to it, I think he would very much appreciate it.
Yep, I will do that.
And if there's, like I said, any scenarios that I didn't think of, because maybe things have changed since we built our majority, in our case, we've built everything that we've used. We don't go in very often and build new things. We have everything we need. There may be something new that I'm missing. I'm always telling people here that, maybe we should go back and review what we built because it's kind of old. Like maybe we should revamp it, but if it's not broken, don't fix it. So I kind of agree with that on most days. We have enough fires to deal with. All right. So here we are with and I'm going to leave out your org to org here. We're going to just say the connectors in general here, that this is data outside of Salesforce, and the live connectors outside of Salesforce. And what I was saying before was that the data insert from the live connectors goes straight to where you can use it for visualizations and updates on a cadence. So that's one of the reasons you can't put security on it, right? Because it's moving data. It is in transit all the time. Whereas if you're using like Snowflake or there's a lot of middleware pieces I notice right now, like a lot of, kind of in between a data lake and your Salesforce instance that you can connect to. So a lot of people are manipulating data here, right? And then they're loading it. It goes into this object. It goes into recipes and data sets, and then you can do whatever you want to do to it. And then, you visualize it. But a lot of people are doing all their manipulation here, transferring it in like using this as a holding bin and then sending it straight for Viz. And the interesting part is it takes a lot of the strain off of CRMA if you can solve your data out here and then put it in the way that you want. And then you don't have to wait that processing time during recipes. So this all, believe it or not, from here to here and here to here, this uses REST API and not bulk API. So Sayantani, I find this super interesting that the only time we're using bulk is when we have those external files, like
Uh-huh.
when it's those users, which also means you have more of a chance of hitting limits in your entire org using CRMA if every way you're pulling in, like 3/4 of the ways you're pulling data in, are going to use this REST API. Because REST API is already busy in your org. So there's a lot of data management in the future that all of us are going to have to do, but we'll get there slowly. REST API is also completely configurable. So if you have a really good dev, they can get in the middle of these data inserts here, these two, and do fun things. So there's a whole analytics REST API developer guide on how to do this super efficiently. I hand that over to our team. And so what we do here, for example, is with our connectors, we get the data exactly how we want it outside. We use Google BigQuery. And then the developers write some code that sends it here and then sends it here and then sends it here based on everything has an ID, right? So there'd be a data set ID. So it travels using that data set ID. So it's interesting if you're a developer what you can actually do, and you can make the process more efficient. I wish I could do that, honestly. I think in my past life, I must have been a dev because I'm super jealous. Like, I would love to go in there and just code data to go where it needs to go. But, you know, I was born with a visual brain, so I'm best at learning how things work and explaining them to people. All right, we're getting through here. We're getting to the end. So now let's go to the SOQL connector. If anybody's ever used the SOQL connector, it's not my favorite because I don't use SOQL every day. For all my 20 years, I am not a SOQL expert. I use it when I need to use it, and then I forget about it, right? So I'm in a dashboard and I want to use the SOQL connector, and it's a lot better now. There's a better UI for, picking the objects that you want to go query. All of this lives inside your org. It does not leave. So I'm in CRMA. I'm going out to get data from the rest of my instance and bring it back using SOQL, which is very similar to SQL, as we all know. And it's grabbing the data and putting it right back into my visualization. We're not hitting the data manager. We're not doing recipes. We're not doing replicated data sets. And Sayantani, I do know there's some outliers here, but I don't want to confuse anyone. But I'll give you a good example. We just needed like one field to add to a dashboard. Like, we got all done with this dashboard, and one of the executives wanted one more piece of data, and we didn't want to go back and rerun the entire data set. So instead we bypassed and went directly to Salesforce to get that piece of data. It wasn't the most efficient, but it worked for the use case. This has very, very high impact on your org. Live queries are one of the most expensive expensive things you can do in your org, because you're not just getting data and moving it, you're using Salesforce as a processor. So this SOQL query processes in your org. So you have, the time to go in to see the data, the processing time, and the time to move that data back. So if anybody on this call has ever had an outside application that has a UI, even outside of CRMA, I'll give you a good example. We have Clary here. So Clary has a beautiful UI that you can see forecasting data, but there's no storage behind it. It goes into our production instance, live queries our production instance, and puts that forecasting data back. It's super expensive, and you can actually it's something called a throttle. You can throttle your instance by doing too much processing. And the reason being is it runs your CPU low. So imagine, I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember like Napster, when we all used to get very like, I'm going to download a bunch of music, and you try and download 100 files and your laptop would crash, right? Or your computer would crash. So Salesforce is not magical. The cloud is not limitless. Salesforce has its own computers out there in the wild, right, that hold our instances, and you can actually use all of the CPU for your instance. And they call them pods. They're shared. So, you might share your pod with, 4 or 5 customers if you're like us, or if you're a smaller customer, you might share with hundreds of customers. But everybody on that pod or that shared computer over at Salesforce is sharing the resources. So if you start heavy hitting Salesforce's computer, like you're downloading a lot of Napster files, it will do something called a throttle. It'll slow you down so you can't drain all the resources from the pod, because they don't want the other customers to be impacted, right? So that's another topic for another day. But just know that if you do use SOQL and you do any kind of SOQL work directly from a dashboard, it will be expensive on your org. All right. Last but not least, we have Salesforce Direct. And I know this has changed names a couple of times. Sayantani, what would you explain this, like when you say Salesforce Direct, what's direct about it?
Well, it's basically in the dashboard, and you are using it without the replication of any data set, like literally how Salesforce standard Salesforce reports work, or even custom Salesforce reports in Salesforce without going to Tableau or CRM Analytics. It's pretty much that. But the beauty is you are not stuck with only the report types that exist in Salesforce or in your org. You can pretty much try getting more out of it without crashing the system. Also, a big caveat, it still has the 2000 limit, at least last time I checked. It is still going to by
2,000
default.
records. So you can pull 2,000
Yeah.
records. Okay. That's not a lot.
No, no. So, yeah, it's useful if you are looking for what my opportunities are within a specific account. Just give me that. If you're creating those kind of dashboards, sure, it's useful. But I don't know after that how much people are using it.
Right. So I didn't find this useful while I was here. I don't even think we used it. I played with it, but we didn't use it. But it was interesting when I read the notes about it. Um, it says here that these connections represent data stored in CRM. It says CRM Analytics, but CRMA. Therefore, direct data references aren't included in here. So where are they stored?
They're not. That's why it's Salesforce
They're
Direct.
not, right?
Yeah.
So it's really not that different than the last slide, is it? Because you're just going and getting the data and bringing it back in.
Also, to me, it's slower because it's a direct connection now.
It is a direct
It
connection.
is a direct connection because if you are doing replication, there is incremental replication and full replication. This one, because there is no connection as such, it's actually running the whole thing.
Yeah, so that would also use a lot of processing power in your org. So
Yeah,
this also uses the REST API. This is going to be highly expensive. And I imagine that's why they put the 2000 limit on it. Because what if you were processing like us, like 800 million? Like, what if I said, go to all of our line items and opportunities and calculate the total for 5 years, right?
also, uh, for the direct data, and sorry, I'm confusing it with the dashboard. In the dashboard there is a limit. If you're using it in recipes, there is actually not a limit per se, because I do have large records. But if you look at the notes and the footnotes kind of thing for Salesforce Direct, you'll find that it clearly says that if you're using it only in one recipe, then only use Salesforce Direct. If you're using it in multiple, if you're using the same object in multiple recipes, do not use Salesforce Direct. It clearly states that.
Yeah, yeah, because you could have data drift. There could be a lot
Correct.
of like the data wouldn't be consistent because it's
Yep.
grabbing so quickly. So
Correct.
that's
So it
another thing
clearly
for
states
everybody on the
that.
call is
Uh
you've got
huh.
to think about, are you okay with the delay? There's no such thing as real time. So even if I grab my data every 5 minutes, it's going to change. So if you have multiple dashboards with multiple connections to the same data, they're not going to match up 9 times out of 10, right? Depending on how fast your data is moving. Users are fast, right? I even like even on 5 minute connections, somebody has done something in those 5 minutes since I pulled the data, and
It's
then
going to,
that's what I'm trying to avoid here is we've all been in that situation where we have people that try and prove that our stuff doesn't work, right? And they'll say, look at your dashboard number. And then I went in Salesforce and ran it, right? And in my report, it shows different.
so the other thing I would warn about in Salesforce Direct or in general, and I am glad Salesforce does a weekly full sweep of not incremental load but full load every Friday, 11 a.m., whatever your 11 p.m., whenever your org is set up to. So ours is CST, CDT, as the case may be.
Oh, the dark patching every
Yeah,
weekend,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. They do it every Friday. It's by default that happens. But I would also warn against a bigger challenge for this, because if you have, let's say, and I think most people know this if you're working in Salesforce by now, that if a formula has got updated, then it does not have a record of last modified. The
Right.
last modified does not show if only a formula has been updated. So let's say you have opportunity line items with opportunities. For some reason, there's a formula on opportunities which rolls up from the opportunity line items. You will not find a record that the opportunity itself has been updated. Even so, there would be a
Because
data.
of the parent,
Yeah,
the child parent relationship, right?
correct. Yes, because only the formula changed, as in the value in the formula, not the formula, the value in the formula changed. So you will not be seeing much of anything in there. So just be aware that if your clients are saying that, oh, this should be there, but we are not seeing it, or your users are saying so, well, it needs a full sync. Currently, most things run on incremental sync. Till a full sync happens, you will not be seeing that change.
Oh yeah. So if you sync your data, if you have a major release or dark patching, they may just stall. I remember having to do that like after every release, like kicking them back on again. It's like, why did these stop? Right. And after
Yep.
you do that a couple of times, you learn. I'm just gonna go in after the release and do this, right? So what happens to this like this one, like Salesforce Direct or the SQL queries? Do they still go no problem because you don't have the sync mechanism, right?
Sorry.
So if you have a release or dark patching,
Hmm.
um, how does that affect the SQL queries? Like in this slide and the slide before,
I think it is still pulling the data only, which is on the object. So the formula is also what is on the object, it's pulling that. That's what I think happens.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I have had some instances where, you know how the org is down for like 5 minutes when you do have a release. Um,
Hmm.
I did go to support one time and ask what will happen if somebody uses this, like the Sales
Uh-huh.
Direct or the SQL query, and they said it'll still go. The data just won't be updated.
That's what is my point. That it is still going to go, but the data is not going to be updated.
And 9 times out of 10, the users don't notice, but you will get that one user, right?
Yes.
So,
Who's going to notice
FYI,
everything?
FYI, always be prepared for the one user who will escalate that the data is not so. So here is at the end of our presentation. I didn't make this terribly long because it's a lot to digest, but we have our REST API monitoring resources. So if you want to look at everything about, this is more for developers, just so you can see. It gives you every release, there's enhancements. So you definitely want to make sure that you understand like what changes are done, because it could be limit increases, it could be a change in how you code, it could be the versions. There's a lot of different things to look at here. Um, but I want to point out something, Sayantani, that I caught while I was doing this, is that it's the REST API, but we're going to call it the CRM Analytics REST API because that's, so people can relate the REST API to the portion of it in our org that we're using for CRMA. But look, it's also called Connect REST API here.
Hey, there are things that are still called wave. So I have stopped bothering.
So, what I want to stress in conclusion, if you're learning APIs for the first time, don't get so caught up on the names. The names change, just like it's been Wave and Einstein Analytics and CRMA and Tableau, whatever. REST. You really just want to hone in on the word REST, because that is your fast moving large amounts of data, right? And also, we didn't go into this, but when you make a lightning component, so say you have a page out in Salesforce that's using one of your dashboards or one of your lenses in it. It makes a little component on that page. Um, that is also still functioning the same as it would function in the CRMA UI. It's just out in the page. So the rules that I just showed you above are the same. It's still REST API. It's still getting data out of either the data manager or whatever process you're using to fill it. When you actually plug in CRMA components on the Lightning pages, because it's all already inside of Salesforce, it doesn't use a different mechanism. So I found that super interesting when I was reading this, that I don't think people understand. They think like, if I'm a developer and I make a Lightning component, I'm programming it in the Lightning component. When you are just plugging in CRMA lenses and dashboards into your Lightning pages, there's no code involved. It's drag and drop, unless you want some code, but most people I don't think are going to do that. So you don't really have to worry about that being a different API or anything else. It's going to use the same concepts we just showed you. Now, if I go back here to our resources, if you do have event monitoring, you can monitor your REST API. There is an event log file browser in your admin setup. I live, breathe, eat, and sleep this because my job here, I'm watching CRMA and every other piece of data going in and out of my org. These are files. you don't actually see a visual of your REST API. You get files with data, but you can extract these files for an hour or a day's worth of events, and you can look and see how much data is traveling back and forth on your REST API. This is one of the things I really like about Tableau. Um, CRMA will always be my favorite, but Tableau can haul massive amounts of data on your laptop. So if we have a day that our APIs are not functioning correctly, or they're delayed, or if I just want to see what are we doing? Like, what is an API? What does the data look like that's traveling back and forth on our spooky river or on our freeway? You can take these files out and you can put them in a Tableau dashboard and visualize by hour how much data is going back and forth. And REST API data um, will even go so far as to tell you what object and even which, like the ID. So, for example, if a person is using an application to just pull one opportunity or they're pulling a lot of opportunities via the REST API, this will show up. So what I like to do for CRMA is I like to take Tableau and build a dashboard of everything on our bulk API and then union that with what's going on our REST API. So I like to, from the slide I showed you before on the bulk API, I like to put those two types of API um, uh, payloads, if you want to call them that, that are moving back and forth in our instance all day, and kind of get a complete view of what's going on all together. And that way you can optimize. If one user is using a lot of resources, you can work with them to take that down. One of the things that is a big complaint that I've had for 20 something years with Salesforce is there is no way to visualize what's in here within the admin panel. So if I'm an admin, I cannot go and see what's going on with the REST API. I have to have a tool like Tableau to see this. Now, we've all heard of the event monitoring app that is inside of CRMA, and you're told it can do, you can monitor your bulk API and REST API jobs from there. But depending on how big your org is, like my org is huge, um, you could really you could blow the API limits trying to look at the APIs, if that makes sense. So you got to be real careful about, in smaller companies, I would say that's fine. But if you're in a large company, you really want to know how much data that you have in your events before you would spin up that application to use event monitoring in there. And one last side note, I have heard in Data Cloud, or what are we calling it now? Data 360. I have heard that they are working on an event monitoring or like API management section in Data Cloud. But caveat with that is, since Data Cloud is a pay to play model, right, where you're paying to bring data in and query, if you're in a large org like mine, that's going to cost you a lot of money to see your data. So I prefer just to download my files onto my laptop and look at them myself. So if that's helpful to anybody here, I know I get asked a lot. The most frequent question I get asked is, where can I see these APIs? Where's the interface or how can I prioritize my jobs, right? So how can I say I want my CRMA REST API jobs to go first? FYI, there is no prioritization mechanism inside of Salesforce that allows you to say one API over the other gets priority or the jobs within. if you want to do something like that, you have to get a middleware tool, something like MuleSoft. Um, but then again, it would be really hard to coordinate everything that's going on inside your org and outside your org to prioritize it. Sayantani, did you know that, like, out of all these years, they never made a mechanism inside Salesforce for you to say, like, this job goes first, this job goes second?
No, they don't. Why will they do anything for making our life easier?
That would make our that would make our life easy. That
Just Jen,
yeah.
refresh this page. I added the other monitoring resource. For some reason, if you do the slideshow, doesn't show you updates
Oh, which one did you say you did that on?
on this page.
Let me
So
see if
just
I.
refresh it. See?
Yay. Okay, cool. Oh, wonderful. So we have the daily limits for this one. Oh,
Yeah,
look, Mark is in here. Hi,
Mark is
Mark.
in here.
You.
Yep.
But yeah, so let's keep this a moving document. And in the future, we can, we'll start adding more about limits. And I'll even move this into some Tableau stuff and some data cloud, data 360 stuff. But I think we just need to keep this moving because one of the things that we're going to have to learn now that we kind of got intro to API is what are those limits on each of those APIs. For example, bulk API, you can only do like 15,000 jobs per hour. What does that mean for you? Like, what does 15,000 consist of? So like I said, that's a whole nother like um, hours worth of information to digest. So I'm
Mhm.
going to stop sharing. I think, did it stop sharing?
It did.
Oh, look who joined. We got a couple more people.
We did.
Does anyone have any questions? I know it's a lot. I have dedicated the last like 5-ish years of my career to just learning how APIs and data movement works in Salesforce, and it's not something that you can learn. It's not something where if you're just an everyday CRMA user and you want somebody to say, like, I thought I was going to go out onto like Google and see these diagrams, right, that have CRMA that branch out to all the different APIs in there. And there is nothing, like not one thing. And
Mhm.
what I realize is because you can either go to the Salesforce Architects website and get information about every API out there, or if you're a developer, you can get information about how to work with every API out there. But if you're just a CRMA or a data person like us, there's no materials out there to teach people how does data work with APIs, right? So we're kind of going to uncharted territory here. I did, Scientology, make a suggestion to the teams, the groups that run like the architect groups.
Mhm.
Um, I said, you're really missing an opportunity here. There's a lot of us out here that we don't want to be a full architect. We just want to be a data architect. Well, I am a data architect by trade, but what if I just wanted to get a certification that I understand how data works with analytics tools?
You have the C. You
That's
have the
not
CRM analytics thing, the
no
certificate.
no
Also,
but
your camera has been off all the while.
huh?
Your camera has been off all the while.
Oh, sorry.
No
I did
worries.
it so that I would
Yeah, I know. So your presentation doesn't throttle.
hi. Welcome to the mothership. May I help you? Yeah, so one of the things that I have been really getting on Salesforce and the architect teams and the different people that do certifications is we're not getting any less involved in APIs, limits, governor limits, event monitoring, especially with data cloud. You're going to have to know how all that works in order to manage your data costs. So they really need to introduce a section for all of us that work with data just called, data transactions and optimization, right? Because especially with AI, everybody on this call better get some rest, because with AI, we're going to be needed more than ever as data people, because AI is all about keeping your data moving efficiently and using the least amount of data to get X results at the end. So if you want to get in the middle of the AI in a place where you don't ever have to worry about losing your job, just learn how the data moves and how to keep it moving without issues. And that's just APIs. At the end of the day, it's nothing but an API, because AI is just data. Whether it's 10 places, one place, an automation or a chatbot or an agent, it's just data moving under the hood. And as analytics people, we should be able to see how this data moves, make sure it's moving, and make sure it's optimal. Because if you're getting charged $2 a transaction or whatever, the particular one you're working with is charging, um, you don't need any extra anything in that mix, or you're going to have a bigger bill. So I'm starting to have these conversations. It's a hard conversation to have because nobody understands. And one of the things that I realized that I can't really put on a slide, but I'll tell everybody here, is that when I was around when Salesforce first started, we had to understand how the data moved back and forth, because there was no support, there was no community. So the first time I ever hooked up an outside, in our day, we called it an ERP, like I had a big warehousing system in pharma. We hooked it up to Salesforce to pull our invoices in. Well, the first time I had a developer help me do that, I crashed all of Salesforce. There was no data in there, or there's very few records of data in there, and it didn't work. And I was like, what happened? And this is circa 2004-ish. And I went to support and said, hey, what happened? And they said, oh, you have a limit of, 20,000 calls from Salesforce to your ERP per hour, and so our limit was 20,000. We were using bulk API, and we had just made too many calls. And they said, so what it's going to do is every hour it'll go get 20,000 more and 20,000 more until you have all your data brought in. So back in 2004, I had this all diagrammed out, like which API I was using, how many records, what the schedule was. And so every time we added more data into Salesforce, I had a little cheat sheet on what our schedules were. So for example, new orders that came in through customer service, they were on a 15-minute cadence. I want those in immediately, because we don't want a sales rep calling the account and asking them to order something if the customer already ordered that, right? But then at 5 o'clock every day, we decided that would be the time that all the invoices came in. Problem was, a whole day's worth of invoices would be a lot. So I learned, instead of, at 5 o'clock, I'll just, from 5 o'clock to whenever they were finished, I'll just take the max amount of records every hour until we were finished. So sometimes if we had a really heavy day, all of so we would have orders, invoices. So, because you could have an open order, right? So we would have orders and invoices, and then the individual line items. So some days, in an hour, we would have everything. Some days it wouldn't be completed bringing all that data into Salesforce until 7 a.m. the next day. And that's the same thing we're doing right now with all of our data, right? We are just, doing that same thing I did in 2004. But between 2004 and 2025, Salesforce has never made a mechanism in the middle where we can watch this going real time, right? And see what's going back and forth. And if you use event monitoring, just heads up, event monitoring is in the past. It's an event that happens. So you're not catching things in transit. You're looking at the patterns of what's already happened. There is no mechanism right now. I don't know about everybody here, but one of the things my executives are really on me about, or not on me, but on all of IT, is real time, real time, real time. Catch a problem, catch a query while it's going. And I almost every single day have to go to a meeting and say the same thing. There is no way for me to see when the query is actually going through Salesforce and processing. I can see when the query enters Salesforce, like you can pop off like a platform event and see that, I'll give you a good example. Outreach came in to get tasks or leads out of Salesforce, right? So when Outreach uses the REST API to come into Salesforce, you can custom make a platform event. And for those of you that don't know what a platform event is, it's really just an email or a notification, right, that something happened. So I can have it shoot off a notification that started, but I don't see the query for all those tasks and leads while it's going. Once it's done, a event will generate on the REST API saying, okay, Outreach came in and took 400,000 records, and they were this many leads and this many tasks, and the total runtime was this amount, and it used this much CPU, right? So by the time I get that, it's already happened. So if you're using it to troubleshoot your org, if you're using, say, events to troubleshoot your org, just remember they're only in the past and they're not live. Now you can buy tools that do that. So like MuleSoft has a really good tool. It's very expensive, but they have a tool that you can do that kind of thing with. But then you would have to have like 10 more people to watch that and configure it. So you're not really saving any money doing it. But what are your thoughts, Sayantani? Because you kind of sit in Command Central and you don't have events and ways to monitor all of the data movement in your org. So how do you do it?
We don't. We just use the created dates and the last modified dates. Anything else that our users do, they only have read-only access, so we don't have a problem.
So you just keep your org under tight wraps so that you.
Very, very tight trap.
So you're doing it how I did it in 2004, where you kind of have a mental schedule, right, of what's moving in your org, and you make sure.
Everything is on schedule. There are lots of flows running. Everything in CRM analytics is on schedule. Workflows have been turned into flows, so anything happens, those take care of it. So there are a lot of triggers happening behind the scene.
Yeah.
So
So triggers, workflows. I mean, there's so many parts and pieces to a org that
correct.
imagine what's going to happen when we start hooking all these agents and AI
Yeah.
ish stuff into our org. Remember, everybody, it's just data. It's just data, right? At the end of the day. But imagine like what's going to happen if 3 or 4 processes all try to get the same record at the same time.
That's why the direct SFDC direct. That's why the guidelines is if you're using the same object more than once in multiple recipes, or well, if you're not using once, you have multiple recipes and it is being used in multiple recipes, then do not use this.
Yeah, and that's when you can get things that are called like row locks. You
Correct.
something called concurrency. So row lock happens when a process is working on a record for more than 20 seconds, and then everything gets backed up. So think of it this way: if you got like a slow car on the freeway in front of you, right? Everything on the freeway has got to wait behind that car. There's another one that you can get. I used to get this a lot in CRMA, which is a concurrency warning. Concurrency just means that there's too many requests at the same time. So instead of the one request taking a long time, this just means too many cars try to merge into the same lane at the same time, right? So it's really important that for those of us that are data people, right, to start learning just the data behavior, right? How data behaves inside Salesforce, how does it behave inside CRMA, and how does it behave together, right? Like, how does what I build in CRMA affect the whole? And there's no place you can go out and learn that, right? It's more of like all of our individual experiences, or in my case, um, being that I've been the oldie locks, right, the crypt keeper here, the first time we ever had these problems in CRMA, everybody was dumbfounded, right? They're like, I don't understand. Our data jobs are taking 3 hours, or they're erroring, and we don't understand. And I just kind of sat in that meeting, like, what do you not understand? Salesforce has limits, right? So, it's becoming more and more of a thing, I've noticed over like the last year, especially, where everyone is starting to see that there's limits inside Salesforce, but there's nowhere to go out and learn these exact limits and what they mean. So, learning in conclusion to everything we've talked about here, the best thing you can do is understand, what does it look like under the hood? What does your data movement look like under the hood? Where does the data start? What is it used to get inside? Where does it land? And where is it used? Once you can figure out those things, like we just talked about, data outside of Salesforce uses bulk or REST API to move into Salesforce. It sits in an object, or sits in, like, for example, a replicated data set is going to, be pulled from Salesforce and stored there, but external data set coming into Salesforce is going to be in an object, like it sits in that insights external data object. If you can learn just these parts and pieces of data origination, data landing, method of transportation, and then what are those limits on the method of transportation? It's kind of like you can only go 70 miles an hour on the freeway, right? It's very similar to like road rules, so to speak. If you can learn all of that, when this whole AI revolution, takes place, you're going to be the most important person working on your Salesforce org, because that's not something that can be taught. That has to be something experienced or independently learned that we take on ourselves. All right. Okay. I'm going to get off my soapbox about APIs and limits and everything else. Does anyone have any questions? I know I saw Shuba was here for a second, but then he left. But it's like, what, 3 o'clock in the morning there? Or have I completely blown everyone's minds with how Salesforce works on the inside? Or just keep multitasking and pretend I'm not talking. That's cool too. And then watch the recording later when you need it. Sayantani, can you think of anything else? I mean, I can think of a lot of things, but maybe we can get
Yeah, this is one of those topics that can go on and on for hours and still not end.
It's very multifaceted. Even me, I had to take, like, when I did this presentation, I'm like, we're just gonna stick to this and not go down 5 rabbit holes, right? Because everybody's seeing this for the first time, how it works under the hood. I know, even when I learned, I remember the first time somebody told me uh, CRMA shares the same part of Salesforce that workflows use. In my head, I couldn't make that work, right? I'm like, workflows are workflows. How does
Right?
this
They
work?
confused all of us. Like, why are you talking about workflows and CRM analytics? It confused all of us.
But when you think of it just as a computer, and it's just the part of the computer that workflows also use, it's not really that scary,
No,
right?
no.
But you just, in your brain, you're like, how can these two things be in the same place? Because they're so very different in how they work. But once again, it's the data. It's all about data underneath, right? And the data's got to move, and they both move data, right?
Or when they said they are moving, uh, the recipe moved from something else to Apache Spark, right? It was something else. Even that was scary. Like, is this even going to work?
Yeah, and that's the thing is a lot of people choose not to understand how it works, and I respect that, right? I completely respect. A lot of people don't want to know how it works. They just want to do their job and get through their day and go home at 5 o'clock, hopefully. Um, I just am autistic enough that I decided that I was going to be that person that figure out how it works under the hood. And we also were lucky enough to get, our factory tour. We both Sayantani and I have been to Salesforce and worked with the CRMA team to see how everything works under the hood. So we were lucky to see that, but it does open a can of worms. It does. It was like, well, okay, now that I know how this works, I need to go see how the rest of, if I understand how CRMA works under the hood with APIs and everything else, um, how does the rest of Salesforce work? And then you get into what architects do. And that's a little, I don't need to know all that, right? I mean, there's so many different APIs and parts of Salesforce that um, I've never even used in my 20 years, but they're there, right? I mean, you saw that list of 82 APIs, right? I mean, there's some APIs that I've never even heard of on here. Like, for example, there's a lot of marketing ones, but you can't see my screen right now, but um, communication cloud. There's a communication cloud. Um, there's consumer goods cloud. I mean, there's actually a data prep recipe REST API. So I tell you what I'm seeing, like in general, when I look through all these APIs, is I don't think there's actually that many APIs. I think that they're just naming them so you can find the part that you're using in Salesforce, but they're all REST. If they say REST, it's all REST API. It's kind of like different colored. Uh, I want to say different colored cars, but it's not really. It's like have you ever been on one of those freeways that, like here in Arkansas, we have a freeway out here that's been built up and built up. So it used to be um, Business 71, but then they built it into like Highway 540. But it's also, people will call it the bypass. People will call it the freeway, but it's
I
still
live in Chicago, Jen. We have I-90, which is also called I-94, which is also called the Dan Expressway, that is also called Jane Bryan somewhere. It's,
so.
it's fun.
This is what I'm thinking, right? It's still the same freeway. We're just naming it different things so people can understand that it's used there. That's my final assessment here. Okay, have we completely destroyed our brains with all of this?
Ours might not have been destroyed, but let's ask the other three.
Well, I'm planning on taking the same presentation and giving it to people at work and just be, you might learn something. Because I'm having to explain this to people and I see their eyes glaze over. And then they're like, you need to give us a diagram. And I'm like, I'm not going into Lucid chart and building some complex diagram. Like if I could probably on a whiteboard draw what's in my head better than going and making a little detailed ERD. I'm just kind of surprised Salesforce doesn't have it. It would be much easier if Salesforce like drew this for us. But one of my last thoughts here, as we're on our last 20 minutes, is it would make more sense that Salesforce does not teach you how all of this works, because then you would theoretically spend more money, right? Like if you use something like Data Cloud, if you don't watch how your data travels, your bill will be bigger.
Yeah. Especially for data cloud, this becomes excessively important, even with Tableau Next, because that also is built on top of data cloud. So if you're not watching what your API is doing or how much data is flowing, and you don't have a cadence for it, and you are letting it run loose, you're in for a big shocking bill.
Right, right. So I don't think that that's actually why they don't teach us this. I really think, and this is just my personal opinion, I think it's just lost knowledge. I think that this was never anybody's jam. And now all of a sudden we're moving so much data out of Salesforce that we're hitting limits that people went, oh, wow, we never taught people that. But also it's like, well, maybe we shouldn't teach people that because then they'll spend more money. And then when I go to the architect teams and I say, hey, where's your lesson on how all this works for data people? Just the data part. I don't want to get into SOAP API and I don't want to write my own Apex. I just want to understand how data moves. Then they look at me like I'm from another planet because they don't care about what we care about, right?
Do most people care about what we care about?
No. Chris, I think we're less. What was it? Like 5 years ago, we were 5% of the entire data community
Yeah,
were data people,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we were like data admins, right?
We were 2%.
Now I would say a lot of people, because of the Tableau and data cloud changes, a lot of people have dumped working on CRMA and they're doing other things. And I didn't dump it. I just had to do, eventually we got to a place where I didn't have to work on it anymore all the time, right? So a lot of us have taken on other responsibilities. So I would say, yeah, we're 2.5, and that's probably a stretch, but we're the most valuable people right now as far as data optimization.
Hmm.
So I feel like I keep telling people I'm not worried about getting laid off in this AI market. I'm more worried about getting my rest right now because when that AI gets rolling, I'm going to be very busy. So it's a little different flavor than everybody else out there who's like, oh, is AI gonna learn to am I gonna lose my job because AI is gonna learn to code and then I won't be coding anymore. Well, I don't really code a lot anyway. I don't know about other people here. Sometimes I have to do a little code, but code is not the majority. The majority of what I do lives up here. I look at things and I say, wow, this is what I see, or this is how we could do this better. That's something you can't build something to take situational awareness and put it into an algorithm. Because think of all the different situations that are out there, right?
Yeah.
Um, the last thing that I would tell everybody is I wouldn't get too involved in all the changes right now that we keep saying every other day. Data Cloud, Tableau Next, CRMA, Lions, Tigers, Bears, oh my. Um, Nothing's really changed. It's all the same right now. And we're sitting here in the same spot. Nothing, from my understanding, is going away or changing anytime soon. All the products are there, they're all available for you to use. But if you're using regular old CRMA and you're not using Tableau Next, that's okay. I mean, you can still technically go make a data flow in there. They didn't ever sunset the data flow creator. So, and you notice I was real good in my slides. I didn't say data flow editor at all. I used recipes, but it's
Hmm.
still there.
It's still there. It works, and it works really well.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a movement back to using that again because sometimes we just need to go in and get it. Some at the end of the day, there's nothing like a good compute relative, is there? Like sometimes we just need to go in and get another layer of data for our data, just get a number or something and add it in and move it right along. And so what has been your experience, because I'm not doing this anymore, moving data through the data flow UI and using recipes? Is one quicker than the other? Like if you generate a data flow to make a data set, or you use a recipe to do the exact same thing, is one quicker than the other? Or Sayantani, are you not using the data flow editor anymore?
No, I am. I'm trying to find the window.
Have you done
So
that? Have you done a comparison?
I did. In some cases, recipes go faster. In some cases, data flows go faster.
Oh, so it's not a one-to-one. It's not this one is always faster than the other,
No, no,
depending on what
no.
you do with it. See, that's what I would do. I would have a bake off. I would definitely have a bake off. If I still had the ability to do that in prod, I would say, okay, I'm going to take all opportunities for this quarter and do some things to it and run it through the data flow editor and run it through the recipe editor and see which one is faster. But it also could be times a day in your org, depending on what's going on in your org, right? So it might, because I know that like traditionally in our org right now, anything from 11 a.m. to about 3 p.m. PST is going to go slower because that's our high volume business hours, right?
Yeah.
Um, I always tell people that you're going to laugh when I tell you this. The slowest time in our org, the very best time to move data around is not after midnight in the early morning. It's actually about 6 p.m. when everyone's driving home from the office. So 6 p.m.
Uh,
T is our lowest volume hour, because we're global. So about from 6 to 9 is quiet, and about 9
mm,
p.m. JPAC starts getting on, right?
mm,
We go through like JPAC, EMEA, all of our time zones. India gets on, and then we get really, really busy from about midnight to 4. Then we get this tiniest little break between 4 and 7, and then it picks back up when the America sales teams start. So it's fun when I take my whole org and I take like 30 days and watch the data movement for 30 days. It's interesting to see always at 6 p.m. It'll go from like 6,000 REST API queries to like 200. All right, I'm getting silly now. I'm gonna go get some food, go run some errands, see what fires I missed. Are you doing anything for Halloween tomorrow, Sayantani, or are you just hiding?
First, I'm going to stop the recording.